Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Alan Alda, and I guess I should explain my face. I'm shooting a movie, that's why I have a beard on now. It's no sign of disrespect to anybody here. Neither is yours, no. I want to welcome you all to these talks today, and I met the authors that you're going to meet a little while ago, about an hour ago. I found meeting them just wonderful, and I think you will too when you hear from them. I don't know if anybody here would agree with this, but I have the feeling that although they've written very diverse books, they're all linked by one question, and I think that question is, if doing the right thing is the thing to do, what's the right thing? I don't know if they'd agree with that. I don't even know if I'll agree with it after I hear what they have to say. But I think their life and their work, the life and the work of Valerie Plame Wilson and Paul Krugman and Russell Simmons and Muhammad Yunus, who we'll also hear from, really deal with that question of how can we make the decisions that we make add up to doing more good than harm. On the other hand, maybe that's what I think, because that's what my book is about. To some extent it is, anyway. My book started for me, I'll just take a minute and tell you a little about my book. My book started for me in a very personal way. It picked up where the first book that I wrote a couple of years ago left off, in Chile, where I was on the top of a mountain interviewing scientists for my science program. I was in an observatory, and I got attacked by the worst pain I'd ever felt. It was an obstructed intestine, and they had to take me down the mountain, an hour and a half down a bumpy road to this little dingy emergency room in a small town in Chile. And unbelievably, the doctor there who saw me at 1 in the morning was an expert in this kind of surgery, and he saved my life. I was about to die in about 2 hours. And he leaned into me and he said, "Now, some of your intestine has gone bad, and we have to cut out the bad part and sew the two good ends together." And I said, "Oh, you're going to do an end-to-end anastomosis." And you should have seen the look on his face when they said that. He said, "How do you know that?" I said, "Oh, I did many of them on MASH." And it's true. That was the end-to-end anastomosis was the first operation I learned about on MASH. It was invented during the Korean War for that particular kind of surgery. Now, the funny thing was, he had been watching MASH when he was in high school. So the two of us came to this evening from a fictional background. And we were going to do the real thing. So the way the story ended was I lived. And I can't tell you, I was really glad about that part of it. And I think what happened to me is what happens to most people who get a second chance at life. You want to make the most of it. You suddenly realize, in a way you never did before, how precious your life is. We've been reading about Governor Corzine, who seems to be going through this, and everybody I know has had this happen to them, wants to get the most out of this new life that's been handed them. And I wanted to get the most juice I could out of this life. And I did that by, from then on, only doing things that really interested me, and when at least professionally, and when I did those things, I gave it everything I had. And I was really getting a lot out of my life. I was, at one point, in 1 year, about a year and a half after this thing happened to me, I was nominated for a Tony, for an Emmy, and for an Oscar, and my first book was a bestseller. I mean, I couldn't be happier, couldn't have been happier. And then one night, this is where this new book started. One night, late at night, I'm trying to sleep. In the dark, I hear this voice in the back of my head, and the voice says, "So, have you lived a life of meaning?" And I said, what are you kidding? I mean, my life couldn't be better. What do you mean meaning? I'm talking to myself here. I'm having this really stupid conversation. I mean, my work was great. My children, my grandchildren were thriving. My wife and I were happier than we'd ever been. We were taking time to do idle, playful things. We went down to see the Grand Central Station because we hadn't seen it in 30 years. And then we're walking back, we can't find the cab. When we get to 59th Street, we still can't find the cab, and we smell horses. And we take a horse and carriage the rest of the way home. I mean, my life was perfect. Why would I look for meaning in my life? But once the question came up, it wouldn't go away. It kept poking its finger in my chest. It kept demanding an answer. And right around this time, I've been thinking of things I had said to young people at commencement talks that I'd given to my children, to my grandchildren, and I was always urging them to look for a life of meaning, to find out what they valued. And I realized that I really wasn't just talking to them. I was challenging myself with these same questions. So really, all I had to do was listen in on what I had been saying, which is why I called the book Things I Overheard While Talking to Myself. I seem to specialize in strange titles. The first book was called Never Have Your Dog Stuffed. Now, you'd think this wouldn't be such a hard question to answer because when I look back, I did accomplish a couple of things in my life. But the funny thing is, I don't know if this is true for other people, but for me, looking back at past accomplishments doesn't do it. It's as if it happened to somebody else. Marcus Aurelius said 2,000 years ago, he said that all we have is now. And I think that's so interesting that 2,000 years ago, he understood, if I get him correctly, he understood what a brain scientist told me a couple of years ago, that the way the brain works now for us only lasts about 5 seconds. And everything else is a memory of the past or thinking of the future. It's the past or the future. And the past and the future are they never turn out to be what we think they are. Now is really all we can experience, I think. So I started rummaging in the back of my mind and in the bottoms of drawers, looking for things I'd said. And I wanted to figure out the context of those things. I wanted to figure out what was happening in our lives when I said them, maybe 10, 20 years ago. What was the country going through? What made me come up with these things that I was telling these young people? And I thought, this is really going to be fun. You know, every time I'm about to look into myself, I think it's going to be fun. This is a kind of narcissistic madness actors division. And I actually drove myself crazy writing this book. It was like a chronicle of my year of thinking manically. And I certainly have plenty to listen to because, you know, when you get to be a celebrity of sorts, they ask you to come and speak at places where you really have no business speaking. But just because they want somebody up there people have seen before. So I would have been asked really weird places. I mean, this is hard to believe, but I was asked to give the Grand Rounds lecture at the Weill Cornell Hospital last year in front of psychiatrists. The Grand Rounds lecture. And I did it. That's even harder to understand. But I went in and I talked about what I did know about, which was celebrity itself. And I called it the celebrity and its discontents. And the thing about celebrity that's so interesting is it's odd in many ways, but on both sides of it. A lot of people think that celebrity will solve their problems. It's one of the ways that people hope to find meaning in their lives. And in fact, it doesn't solve your problems. You get an extra set of problems, and the ones you had, they're even harder to deal with. But many people even think that they think you have special powers if you have celebrity. People, when MASH became a hit, people were sending me letters telling me they were thinking of committing suicide, and only I could help them. It was a very odd position to be put in. And some people think you have special powers. You can avoid disaster. I was doing the science show in Italy, and we were doing a story about the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which is leaning so badly. I don't think they fixed it yet. It's not just going to fall over. The weight will make it explode if they can't stop it from leaning. So the guy who is the custodian of the tower is taking me up the stairs, up the tower. And I see this sign that says, "No one permitted beyond this point." And I said, do you let people go up here? He said, "Oh, no, but in your case, we made an exception." But the trouble was, with all of this rummaging around in my head, trying to think of things I'd said to try to understand how I really felt about this, I couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I was bellyaching about this to my friend, Arnold Steinhardt, one night at dinner. Arnold is a great violinist, and he's also a wonderful writer. He's written a couple of wonderful books about music. And he had this really interesting suggestion. He said, "Why don't you write one more chapter, but make one more talk. Write a commencement talk that's really different. The commencement talk you would give from your deathbed, and see what comes out." And I thought that was a really interesting idea. And as I started to think about it, I realized that in my life, I've experienced pretty much all of the things, most of the things that people look to give meaning in their lives. Love, art, parenthood, grandparenthood, political activism, service to others in philanthropy, money, fame, and even just pure action, just keeping moving, keeping busy. That's another way people look for meaning. So having done all of that, it felt like I was in a position to finally answer that question from the middle of the night. And I got it. I actually figured it out, I think. And this is it. For me, this is what the meaning of life is. I'm sorry, my time is up. You'll have to read the book. A shaggy dog book. Okay. No, it's time to introduce Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad could not be here with us today. He couldn't be in this country. But he's been asked to make a little video, and we're going to show the video to you. Just in case you don't know about Muhammad Yunus, he's an extraordinary person. He brought an astonishing idea to the world, which is microcredit, small loans to people who are impoverished, who through that very tiny loan get on their feet. Sometimes the loan of just a few dollars can turn an impoverished person into an entrepreneur. Sometimes it's just enough to buy a push cart or a sewing machine, or to just buy the raw materials to do basket weaving, and suddenly these people are in business for themselves and not at the mercy of someone else. He founded the Grameen Bank, which became a world movement. And he's changed the lives of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. And I've met him, and I'm telling you, he's really an extraordinary, inspirational person. And he's as humorous and plain-spoken as he is a genius at changing people's lives. So he's taped a message for us, and let's watch Muhammad. There it is.
Friends, I'm very happy to be with you today. On this occasion of the Book Expo, and also the 10th anniversary of my publisher, Public Affairs. I wish I could be with you physically, but unfortunately I couldn't make it. I'm involved in some work in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a young democracy. We are going through a period of a lot of difficulties in our democracy. I've been working with the poor people, particularly poor women in Bangladesh, for the last 30 years. I tried to do as best as I could to change the life of the people who are in extreme poverty. And that worked in a way that has helped people to lift themselves out of poverty through Grameen Bank, through microcredit, which became known around the world. My book, which I narrated my experience over years, what I did through Grameen Bank, through microcredit, in my book, Banker to the Poor. And I was very happy that it drew a lot of attention throughout the world. It has been translated in many, many languages. And the response I get from the readers is enormous, particularly from young people. They see something of hope, something that they can do, they can participate and build a new world for themselves. And my experience with microcredit, with Krugman Bank, has led me to another idea. I see why poor people remain poor. One such problem is in our conceptual framework. So I was addressing the issue of business. The business today is only way you think about business to make money, profit maximization. Profit maximization is the mission of business. And to me, that's a too narrow way of putting people in the world of economics. I think the human being is much larger than just being an instrument for making money. So another dimension I would like to address is the dimension where human being wants to be of help to other people, to create a new kind of world through economic activities, through business. So I'm calling this business a social business. Social business is a non-loss, non-dividend business, where you create a business to do good to people, to bring changes in the world, without any expectation of making money out of it. So that's what the subject of my new book, which I'm addressing you on this occasion. This is how social business can change the world and end poverty in this planet. So this will be the subject of my next book. And here I'll be describing what social business is all about, how this can be created, how this fits into all our desires and wishes. This is not something I'm inventing in people. It is there in the people. Simply, it never had the occasion to release itself. So I'm just giving a framework where people can express themselves in creating social businesses to address the issue of poverty, to address the issue of child labor, to address the issue of children on the street, to address the issue of environment. Anything we see need to be changed in order to have a better world can be addressed through social businesses. We don't have to put everything on the shoulder of the government. Government can do limited things but cannot do everything. So here, as citizens, we have responsibilities to take. So this is one way, doing through social businesses we can address that. I hope you will pay attention to the issue that I'm raising, and I'll be very happy when the book is out and I see readers taking interest as they took interest in my first book. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and who'll be talking in person, Valerie Plame Wilson. In 2003, she moved from nearly complete obscurity to the center of the nation's attention. And it had been an obscurity that had protected her work and, as a CIA operative, to some extent, her life. When Robert Novak gave out her name in his column, her life changed. And a national discussion began that's still not resolved. White House and State Department officials had revealed her secret status to several journalists. Why was her identity leaked? What purpose was served? Why is the CIA still throwing roadblocks in the way of the publication of her book, the book you'll hear about today? Her book is called Fair Game. And here now is the woman who herself became fair game, and whose experience, I think, raises questions about the fairness of the game herself. Please welcome Valerie Plame Wilson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Valerie Plame Wilson. I want to tell you first, when I was asked to do this, to join you today, I was literally unpacking books. My husband and I and our 7.5-year-old twins, we have boy-girl twins, just moved from Washington, D.C. to Santa Fe, and we had 12,000 pounds of household goods. I know that because they weigh that, and 6,000 were books. I'm not making this up. So when I was called and asked to join you today, that's what I was doing, so I think that's very appropriate. And just the other night, right before I came, I had tucked my daughter in for bed, and I went in to check on her a few minutes later, and here she was under the covers reading with a flashlight. So I thought, yes, I've done something right as a mom. I want to start by reading my to-do list of the last 10 days. And this is, I'm not making any of this up either. So pick up dry cleaning, get kids' camp stuff at Target, attend oral arguments for our civil suit in which we sue Vice President Dick Cheney, Karl Rove, Libby, Armitage. Go to Home Depot, pick up garden hose, hooks for pictures, sue the CIA on First Amendment grounds, fly to New York, attend the BEA. So here I am, done. Let me tell you a little bit about the oral arguments which took place in Washington it was May 17th. I have to tell you, when my husband first broached the idea with me of doing a civil suit against those in the administration that had leaked my name, I was very much against it, and we had a lot of discussions at very high volume because I knew that there would be a great deal of pain involved, and we had already been through quite a bit, and for our family as well. But as time went on and I had seen what had happened to our family and what continues to unfold, my attitude changed. And when Joe and I talked about it and discussed why are we really doing this, we have three primary reasons for why we think this is worthwhile. The first one is to get to the truth. As you may have noticed during Mr. Libby's trial, neither the Vice President nor Mr. Libby testified. So there is still a great deal of information that needs to be discovered. And sometimes through a civil suit, that can happen. The second reason is to hold our government officials to account for their words, for their deeds, and that is a way of doing it. And finally, it's to prevent future abuses, because if you allow this to go by without being challenged on a legitimate basis, then our liberties and freedoms will continue to be eroded by a government, and we cannot allow that to happen. Now, when I was in the courtroom, on the defense side, there were at least 6 attorneys, and I tell you, they looked great. They were in pinstripe suits, they had blow-dried hair, and they were making their arguments before the judge. I should back up just a little bit to tell you that the reason for this oral argument was that the defense has asked for a motion to dismiss, and this oral argument was to determine, hear both sides, whether the case will go forward. So I'm not a lawyer, and I can tell you I only understood about 20% of what was said. But even I was able to understand when the lawyers were making the argument in the Vice President's case that he has complete immunity. Essentially, he can do whatever he wants and say whatever he wants because his office covers him. And even I could understand that the judge was somewhat incredulous when he was listening to this. So after the defense finished, all the lawyers who looked so good, our lawyer got up. His name is Erwin Chemerinsky. I don't know if you know him, but he's a First Amendment superstar in his world. And Erwin, he's not a big man, he's not physically imposing, he's a little disheveled, and he has a quiet demeanor. But I can tell you, he got up there and he had that courtroom, including the judge, who is known for somewhat conservative worldview, riveted, because his intellectual horsepower blew everyone away, and he made outstanding arguments. So we were very proud of Erwin, and the judge will make a decision probably by the end of the summer, so we're waiting to hear about that. Let me tell you a little bit now about the news of the past couple days. You may have read that I, along with co-plaintiff Simon & Schuster, is suing the CIA. I never thought I'd say that. This stems from an agency position that I cannot acknowledge my government service prior to 2002. Now, don't look for logic here. I can tell you that this has nothing to do with national security and everything to do with political interference and manipulation in the process. So as you can appreciate, this sort of decision by the agency makes a memoir somewhat problematic. I am not seeking carte blanche to reveal all the details of my government service. Not at all. I will defend and understand my obligations and responsibilities about preserving and protecting classified information. Absolutely. But I am entitled to write, as many other former agency officers have written, I am entitled to write about my story, the unclassified information that is already in the public domain. There should be a consistent treatment of authors, and the way I have been treated, I will tell you, has been absurd. I and my lawyers have tried to be cooperative in every way, diligent, patient. We have followed through the process, and finally we have no choice but to be where we are, which is to have to sue. I'm very, very grateful that Simon & Schuster has stepped up because they understand the importance of this. The good news is we still have a publication date, October 21st, and we will be publishing. But this is why this suit matters so much to me and to everyone in this room, and this is why it should. Because just as you have to be vigilant to protect our national security, something I believe in passionately, we have to be vigilant to protect our freedom of speech and the First Amendment rights. Otherwise, it will be eroded. Let me just tell you a little bit about my book, what I can. It's a memoir of a woman's career with the CIA. I was proud to serve my country. I was loyal. I loved my career. It was exciting. And I got to do something that I thought was meaningful and worthwhile. Toward the latter half of my career, I concentrated on counterproliferation issues, and I loved what I did. I mean, essentially what I was trying to do was make sure the bad guys don't get nukes, for instance. It talks about the experience of being an operations officer. I was one of the first females who was brought in to serve specifically in operations. So being a female in very much a man's world, and the experiences and adventures that go with that. Of course, I talk about the sudden glare of media in July 2003 when my name was leaked to the media, and the overwhelming sensation of going from, as you say, anonymous, being a wife and a mother and a career woman, to being very much in the papers all the time. I don't know if you're used to seeing your name or your picture, but I'm still not used to any of that yet. And then dealing with the aftermath. As you can tell, the story is still unfolding. It's not done yet. Some of you have asked me earlier this morning if I enjoyed the writing process or if I had done any writing before. The writing I've done before was all really, really dry intelligence reports. But I enjoyed the process, much to my surprise. For the first time, I got to go through the events that have happened to me and my husband at about 120 miles an hour and actually think about it and actually absorb it. So I found that part of the whole process really, it was a catharsis in many ways. So I enjoyed writing. I hope you enjoy reading. And thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Valerie. Okay. Paul Krugman is a best-selling author and a professor of economics at Princeton University. He's the winner of the prestigious John Bates Clark Medal in Economics. And as you all know, he writes a semi-weekly column in the New York Times. Mr. Krugman, Professor Krugman, has been named the most important political columnist in America by the Washington Monthly and has been identified by Editor and Publisher magazine as one of the top columnists in the country. His book, The Conscience of a Liberal, though, is not a collection of previously published essays, but a brand new piece of writing. And it sounds fascinating. I've really enjoyed meeting him this morning and talking with him. I think you're going to find him fascinating when he talks to you. It's a pleasure to introduce to you Paul Krugman.
Gosh, I was hoping that Russell Simmons, I guess he'll be back, but he was, I was taking heart from him and actually cursing the fact that I put on these funny clothes, because if I'd known that the dress code was more relaxed, I would have worn my favorite T-shirt. It's the one that has a chart of Bush approval ratings since the beginning of the term on it, and underneath the words that say, I disapproved before it was fashionable. A lot of what I've done in the past 6 very long years has been defined by initially unfashionable disapproval of this administration. And of course, at this point, it is now fashionable. It's no longer considered outrageous to say what was, in fact, it's considered conventional wisdom to say it was considered outrageous and radical not that long ago. But at this point, now that disapproval is fashionable, it really is time to go beyond that, to realize that what happened in this country in recent years was not just about one guy or 2 guys that were the wrong people, not just about a few mistakes that were made, but something that had been building for a very long time, and something that, in order to reverse, in order to get into the kind of society, the kind of country we ought to be, is going to take a lot more than just whatever, changing faces 19 long months from now in the White House. Let me tell you a bit about myself and where this comes from. Really, in all of this, I've had 2 things that I thought defined me. The first, as reflected in the title of the book, is that I'm a liberal, by which I mean basically that I believe in a society that does its best to protect people from the avoidable unfairnesses of life, from the avoidable injustices, that our fellow citizens shouldn't be in dire poverty in old age because they had bad luck in their work lives, that they shouldn't be they shouldn't die prematurely from lack of medical care, basic medical care, because they couldn't afford it or be bankrupted by an illness, that they shouldn't be condemned to a second-class life because they chose the wrong parents, people who couldn't afford to have them go to school in the right school district. We've done, over the past 80 years, we've moved part way towards the kind of society that, as a liberal, I want, but only part way. There's a lot of unfinished business, a lot of things that we ought to be doing to make lives better, to make it more of a just society. But in fact, the reality of what's been going on politically in this country for the last couple of decades has been not so much a push to complete, if you like, the achievements of the New Deal, but in fact a push to roll those things back. And the driving force now, at least in what I'm doing in this book and what I think about, is trying to understand how that's possible and how we turn that around. Now, the other thing about me in addition to being a liberal, is I am a professional economist. Until I started writing for the Times, I spent the great bulk of my time writing things that I think were even drier than whatever Valerie might have been writing, things full of Greek letters and funny diagrams, writing on subjects like why is there international trade and how do financial crises happen. A very apolitical sort of endeavor. Even though economics obviously bears on politics, it wasn't very political what I was doing. That changed. I was hired by the Times to write about economics and business, or so they thought. They actually literally said to me when I was hired, well, you know, we've got lots of people writing about the Middle East, which isn't that interesting anymore. Anyway, it turned out that that brought certain advantages, even though I ended up writing less consistently about economics than I thought. One of them was that, why did I disapprove before it was fashionable? I caught on to the character of the administration before most people did, and I think that's in part because I knew some things that your average commentator didn't, like arithmetic. It also, I think I was probably bolder than a lot of people would have been, not because of some character superiority, but because I had another job in Europe if necessary. It's really hard to remember just how frightening it was and how intimidating it was just a few years ago to be critical. But now I've been trying to turn that to try and combine what I've learned about political life with some of that professorial focus, if you like, and write a book that goes beyond just bashing Bush and Cheney and on to what comes next. Here's what I learned, aside from the fact that we did not have a good administration. What became really apparent very early on was that it was more than just a person. I mean, think about what happened just after the current administration went into office. It was an administration that had been elected, sort of, with fewer votes than the other side. It had a narrowly balanced Congress, and yet it was able to ride over opposition even before 9/11. It was an amazing thing, and the reason was that there was stuff behind it. It wasn't just a few people; it was a movement that had been building in its power, building in influence for a very long time. To understand what happened and to understand where we go from here, we have to understand where that movement came from. That's a story that goes back really 80 years. You have to go back to the origins of the New Deal, understand how the New Deal changed our society, understand the backlash that built against the New Deal. Now, I can't, obviously in the time allotted, go through what is a lot of historical discussion. Let me give you just kind of a preview of some things that you may not know. We now talk as if what happened in these last 6 years was an aberration, as if the things that we saw were something new. And in fact, the mantra of people on the right now is, well, you know, we just need to go back to the legacy of Ronald Reagan. Actually, the cartoonist Tom Tomorrow has said that what the Republicans really ought to do, since this is clearly where they're going, is just nominate someone in a Reagan mask. But what was it really like? Well, what about this legacy? Who is Ronald Reagan, this Ronald Reagan, not the mythological figure that we've built up, but the reality of the person? What was the conservative movement like before Bush? Well, it turns out, one of these things that one really needs to understand is that really everything that you complain about now, everything that we see has been inherent in the movement right from the very early days. Today we treat Ronald Reagan as a kind of almost saintly figure, but he wasn't. Go back and look at the speech that made Ronald Reagan a national figure, and the speech he gave on behalf of Barry Goldwater in 1964. It's an amazing thing to read now, because it was, well, let me just say a couple of things. It was callous. Here's what he said. He said, "We were told 4 years ago didn't say who told you, but it was actually John F. Kennedy, that 17 million people went to bed hungry each night. Well, that was probably true. They were all on a diet. That's the saintly Ronald Reagan speaking. He told a story, unsourced, almost certainly invented, about a woman with 7 children who divorced her husband because she wanted to collect a bigger welfare check. He didn't say what color the woman was, but I think all of his listeners assumed. You know, it was clear what he was appealing to there. He even, this was a, well, you know, we talk about the fuzzy math. It goes all the way back. Ronald Reagan said, federal employees number 2.5 million. And he went on a rant about bureaucracy. Would have kind of spoiled his point if he had mentioned that 1 million of those 2.5 million worked at the Defense Department and another 600,000 were at the post office. So the whole thing goes to the back, right back to the beginning. We talk about you know, this shock at the authoritarian impulses that have surfaced in this country. It has been really, certainly that's the scariest thing. I mean, I certainly feel that some weight has been lifted now, but for several years it was a pretty frightening time for anyone who was critical, and of course for Valerie, that nightmare still hasn't ended. Is that something new? Is that something unique? Well, it's fascinating to go back and look at really the origins of movement conservatism, as it now is, which really is with the National Review, which began in the mid-1950s. The defining issue, the core issue that was sort of a loyalty test for anyone who was going to work for the National Review, anyone who was going to be a part of the early conservative movement in this country, was admiration for and support of Generalissimo Francisco Franco. Here's William Buckley in 1957. General Franco is an authentic national hero. He had the talents, the perseverance, and the sense of the righteousness of his cause that were required to wrest Spain from the hands of the visionaries, ideologues, Marxists, and nihilists. Those visionaries, ideologues, Marxists, and nihilists also happened to be the legitimately elected democratic government of Spain. But if you were a conservative in the 1950s, you thought that overthrowing that was perfectly okay. Okay, there's a long story here. I would say that ultimately, the story is really about trying to roll back what was achieved in the 1930s and 40s, the creation of a society with a strong social safety net, though with some big holes that we need to fix. That it was an attempt to roll back the various forces that made us a middle-class society, and that because they've become eroded over time, have led us back to inequalities of income and wealth now that in many respects are comparable to those of the Gilded Age. In 2000, that movement got hold of all the levers of power and made a big push. The thing is, so far, it didn't go too well for them. They made their big push. They attempted to lock in political control. It didn't happen, at least not for now. And we are now at a moment, really, where I believe we are now is we're at a moment where there's a possibility of really doing again what was done in the 1930s and 40s of a New Deal. In some ways, we were actually lucky in this administration. It was so bad, so incompetent, that it has created a window of opportunity for things to change. Most indications are that the public is actually sympathetic towards a greater role of society in ensuring people against the worst that can happen. There's a lot of the slogans that have been used to beat down opposition have been discredited. I think it's going to be at least a few years before at least this gang can get away with using national security to justify everything it wants. And there is a real possibility. I'm still working on a few things here, but I have a proposed slogan, which is I think we should seek to make George W. Bush the Herbert Hoover of the 21st century. That we should seek to make what has happened in this administration an object lesson of what this kind of conservative governance actually means and use this as a basis to change things. The last point I would make, and the reason why I really felt this book needed to be written, is that what I read now from the history is that seizing the moment matters enormously. There was a long period when we thought of the pretty decent society that we had for about 35 years after World War II. Society with lots of problems, obviously, but decent in some fundamental ways. The society I grew up in, as having been a kind of birthright, something that was bound to happen once America matured, once we got beyond the excesses of the Gilded Age. It wasn't. The more you look at it, the more you realize that there was a window of opportunity to create that society, a window that was created by the Great Depression and World War II, and that we had the right kind of people in power to take advantage of that window and create a society that for a couple of generations made America a much better place than it had ever been before. This is the kind of thing I'm going to be, I'm now talking about. The opportunity is there to really transform America, once again, in a positive direction, make us a better place, make us a place that a liberal like myself can admire. And all of that, the explanation of the details, with all the bullet points and policy, no, anyway, the explanation of what is possible and how the politics of it can work is in the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Russell Simmons has paved the way for countless artists, entrepreneurs, and businessmen in that part of our culture known as hip-hop. His book is called Russell Simmons' Hip-Hop Laws of Success, and he should know what the laws of success are. He's been named one of America's 25 most fascinating entrepreneurs by Inc. magazine. His radio show is syndicated in 50 markets. This is the 15th anniversary of his extremely successful clothing company, Fat Farm. He's the co-founder of Def Jam Recordings, and his Poetry Jam on Broadway won a Tony Award. His Hip Hop Summit Action Network promotes empowerment in young people, and he has ventures in the financial services industry, mobile communications, and philanthropy. Russell, I hope you'll tell us how you did it. Russell Simmons.
Thank you. First, I want to acknowledge what a privilege it is to be on the stage with these three accomplished people. And I was told on the way here that I would be speaking on the same stage with people who were very different from me, and that there was some that I would be speaking with people who had vastly different experiences from me. And when I got here and I met I'd met Alan before, I discovered that we were very, very similar. In fact, I would argue that our experiences are very connected. And I thank you for all your activism and over the years. And your battle for the freedom of speech is one that I'm very familiar with. Many instances I've been. And your discussions about our government is, and people have heard me say things that have gotten me in tons of trouble. I was thinking about earlier I made the statement that I would remember the day that we went to war in Iraq, that I was going on Good Morning America, and all my liberal friends were saying that the troops' feet were going to be on the ground soon, and I should learn to be quiet. So all of everybody on the stage here, I think that they've had courage in times when they had to reach inside and find strength when it wasn't obvious. But what they were stating was, I think, the obvious if you look inside. So they had courage, and for that, I think that I've been very fortunate at moments I've been courageous as well. So thank you for having me here, and it brings me to the subject of my book. So my publishers have asked me to stay on message. Some of you know I wrote a book about love and consciousness, and over the last few weeks, my only discussion has been about bitches and hoes. I don't know how to find. But the book is about that same thing, that the idea that we're all connected, and that there's a place in all of us, and some refer to it as God or higher self. That is the strength that really gives us, not only the courage, but the resources that we need to achieve success. And I did have a radio show for about 4 years where I discussed what we call the hip-hop laws of success. And that was written, and I co-wrote those laws with my partner over there, Chris Morrow. I want to acknowledge Chris. Please give him. So every day for years, every morning, people would hear me ramble about this strength and how it helped us, all of us, to achieve some level of success. And after a few days, only a few days of actually working on this project, I realized that success was something I knew for sure, but was not. That success was not a goal of worldly success. Couldn't be a goal in life. Alan discussed it earlier eloquently to explain to you that success was much more than, and so did the gentleman Muhammad talked a lot about. Success had to be something else. So the laws for 4 years or 5 years we were on the radio were about real success. And we talked a lot about how money didn't make you happy. But then, lots of my audience wanted to know that money made you happy, or happy made you money. So I explained, and the book talks a lot about how happy makes you money, and how that inner strength is the thing that makes you happy and gives you purpose, and it gives you the courage and the strength to become part of the cycle of giving that you're born into. All of us are here as servants. I think it's in all the scriptures, not new, it's like, so we're all here as servants, and so the book talks about how to become a greater contributor. And a good giver is a good getter. Now, what I'm repeating to you is I think it's written, so many times by so many people. Lots of you have got, there's tons of books. I mean, there are more I read in the USA Today. There was 15 books coming out in the next 2 days about The Secret and the secrets of the secret. And the secret. And but it's in all the scripture. It's like, it's in every book. All the prophets came, and Muhammad and Abraham and Lord Buddha and Jesus Christ all came and said the same thing with different colors, said at different times and different languages, but the same thing. So we refer to the laws of those karmic laws that are unbreakable, that are obvious. And so why write a book that restates the obvious? It's a good question. Why write a book about what's, I think that the practice is to remember. And the book is about how you remember to remember the obvious. So the book is called Do You. You is the source. The ideas are the same. Hopefully the book will ring a bell for some of us, because any of us who has faith in the obvious will live under these laws that free you, as opposed to the idea that laws may bind you. We're born into the same cycle, all of us. We have the same laws that we can live by, any of us. And they can promote happiness. And with that happiness and with that strength, you can have success. There's countless examples of people who've proven this to me, or given me more faith in the obvious. Stories of many people who were interns, and how they were a happy person who walked in the office, were great servants. They became the leaders. The leaders were, as you know, great servants. Chairman's a great servant, obviously, right? So just saying, again, what many of you know, all of you have faith in when you're silent for a moment. And so it's my experiences How do I remind people? How many people don't have a book written for them that restates these ideas? And I guess a lot, because it's a bestseller, so that's good news. So I want to thank my publishers, because it wouldn't be a bestseller without them. Bill, thank you so much for believing in me. And I'm supposed to, I've never read notes, but my partner gave me these notes, and I told him I'd take them. These are Chris, I have your notes. I don't know if there's anything in here that I wouldn't say already. He wants to be, talks a lot about yoga. The book does, because, you know, we talk about, there's so many roads to that, you know, that self, that higher self that we refer to, the yogis refer to it as Atman. And I talked about scripture like I can tell you, you know, about the Quran or the Bible or the Torah in great detail, but I can tell you about the Yoga Sutras. And my belief is all scripture runs parallel. Again, I already said all the prophets said the same thing. So there's quite a bit of discussion about yoga and how that practice of yoga, the spiritual practice, and the laws that are promoted to you by Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, are the ones, are some of the ones that can give you a shortcut to making you a stronger and more creative and maybe even connected human being. All of us want to be connected. All of us want those 5 seconds he talked about, as many times over and over again as possible. All of us want to be present, awake, in Christ consciousness for some of you, and samadhi for others, and nirvana, whatever it is. All of us want to be connected. So the book talks in great detail about how do we become connected, which I think I said, like, you know, the good books, the ones I read over and over again, say the same thing over and over again until they ring a bell. The good spiritual books. There's very little to them. The truth is obvious. The book is about spirituality and money. It's 2 subjects a lot of you are concerned with, and certainly the world obviously is obsessed with these subjects based on the number of books and the ideas that are coming out. So why I decided to write the book? Oh, I wrote the book because of a young man sitting right there. Stand up, Jinx. That's Jinx the juvie right there. He hates when I tell his story. I met him, he was 15 years old, and he had just been taken in the hallway in one of the projects and shot, he and his cousin. Cousin? Don't talk about your cousin? All right, whatever. And I met him, and he was part of a mentorship program that we were going to start, and people were going to pay for it, and they never paid, but I took him. He's been, over the last 7 years, he's been like my son, and I watched him go through a lot of pain. I watched a lot of his friends die and go to jail. And long story short, he got shot. Long story told, he got shot a couple of more times at different instances, but each time I watched him get up and get stronger. You know, points to the fact that, you know, each difficult pose makes you better in life, you know, in yoga and so forth. So anyway, I watched Jinx grow, and he was the first one in his family to come out of high school and first one to make college. Recently, in the books talks about this a little bit, he was shot going to a funeral. He didn't do shit. I mean, I think he just sucks bullets in, but he spits them out. So now he's got a record on he has no record company. He had a record deal at the time. He has no record deal now, but he has a record on the radio. Comes from standing in front of the station and begging the DJs. The record looks like it's going to be a hit. So he's in college, and he's got a hit record. Oh. So I would say the inspiration for the book comes from Jinx. I mean, I talk a bit about Paramahansa Yogananda and Kriya Yoga, and I talk a lot about Sachisandananda and some other great spiritual teachers, but it really is, the great inspiration is to watch it happen, watch the miracles unfold right in front of you, and watching Jinx has been that for me. Discovering empowerment, giving for a living. I already said giving and getting is the same thing, and giving inside out. The message to the booksellers. If I left this shit out, I'd be alive. Protecting the First Amendment. There's a chapter about that, about spitting truth to power and letting artists paint the pictures they want of society, and and how important it is to look at those pictures objectively, or with an open mind, and then see where it is that why does it hurt us so much sometimes, these artists give us. So I'm inspired by the ABA and AAB and their protecting the freedom of speech. That comes from my publisher. That's the only thing in the note that's not really mine, but I am inspired by anybody who's fighting to protect this freedom of speech, because it's necessary, and especially in this times, as Paul pointed out, it's a very scary time. It has been extremely scary if you're a scary person, but I mean, I've seen it. I hope that we're learning a lesson, and I hope that we do with this administration. I hope we hold it up to the light, and that people can see it as they get further away from it even better and more clear, and see what a threat we are to the world and ourselves, how dangerous it is to be a sheep. And I think my book talks a lot about that. I think a lot of us we just allow things to happen around us instead of, it talks about meditation and prayer. Look inside, it's obvious the shit we do to the world is wrong. It's obvious that we work so hard on ourselves and not so much on, we lick our wounds so much that it let people suffer everywhere all the time. And I think that, my last statement, I didn't want to get off into politics, but I would say, after 9/11, we had such a great opportunity to promote world peace. Instead, we promoted such a horrible cycle of violence. It's unbelievable. It's just my opinion. I get on this. Oh, here's my introduction. I will read my introduction because it's good. It said, first of all, I want to apologize if this speech sounds awkward. I rarely use notes when I speak, but I didn't want it to be my normal rambling self. One of those people just out there selling his book. My book is the same book that they got published over and over again, so I say that, so I won't, have to buy it unless if you read some of these other books and they inspire you, then keep reading them. That's true, right? The same shit. So I'm going to try these notes. Well, that part, is it over? The time? Somebody's supposed to cut it? Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you, but I've been very moved and inspired today by everybody here. This has been a wonderful. And I think I was right. I think we all are working on the same book. Everybody from a different angle, with different stories to tell and different perspectives. Everybody up here, and Muhammad Yunus too, looking for how we can make the community we live in stronger and better, and how we can check on that and know we're really doing it. We got a late start this morning, or this afternoon, but everybody up here is so fascinating. I would think we might have time for a couple of questions if you'd like to ask a couple of questions. I think they either they have microphones they can get if you want, or you can just scream out just a little bit, because I know people must be interested. Did somebody say here? Where? Yes. Where? Yes.
Is this on?
Oh, somebody. You know what? We'll get a microphone over to you because we have
a microphone. It's coming.
It's coming. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Keep raising your hand. Here we go.
Here we go. What's your name?
My name is Violet Hops, and I'm from New York. And this is to Russell Simmons about your book and thinking that you wrote something that's already been written many times before. I have a son who lost his spirituality due to the loss of another son of mine. And he asked me to come here to see you today because he is inspired by your book, because he's inspired by you. So I thought you should know that.
All right.
We have another question over here. We have a question over here.
Well, it's not a question, but a comment, really. I think each and every one of you have indicated and very clearly how we as Americans should never ever let our intelligence be insulted, because once insulted, we get insulted over and over and over again, and we let those that insult us get the courage to forget about what our rights are. And I don't see it unfashionable at all to always criticize them openly and not be afraid of whatever happens. I admire Valerie very much for what she stood for, and I sympathize with you for what you had to go through. But I am behind you 100%, and I think everyone here is. Not just for you as a person, because you're a beautiful person, but I think because every one of us is afraid to go through what you have gone through.
We got a question right here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Powers, the host of Dr. Nancy Talks Health, and I'm very inspired by all of your stories, especially the inner fortitude that everybody on this panel has expressed. When you discussed, Russell, about how yoga poses make you stronger, how does that apply to all the good that you are all doing?
Yeah, the practice of yoga is most people in America think of it as a physical practice, but in the science of yoga, there's only one part of the 8 steps in the classical yoga practice, the asana practice. And the idea is that in each pose you smile and breathe, you learn to be graceful. And it's part of a spiritual practice. Of course, you take it off the mat. And when you're connected, you find yourself less fearful. And the idea of being free from that fear is the idea of being, all of us, we talked about the 5 seconds that we live over and over again. How many seconds of those 5 seconds can we be present? Presence is referred to by some who can describe a full consciousness as Christ consciousness, or as, that state of service, to be alive and to realize, to be fearless. So yoga, the state of yoga is a state of nirvana, a state of samadhi, or, it's all scriptures refer to the state of God realization, or what is a better word that you might not offend you, but whatever. That's what it's about. It's about being connected. And one of the things that we have a Buddhist monk, he says we're born to learn to overcome the, I'm not quite sure how he spelled it, the illusion of separateness. And that's what lasts only. At the end, when the noise is gone, which yoga is meant to eliminate noise, then left is only, some would refer to only God, or only that state.
My question is for Mr. Simmons. I'm just wondering what the goals are for the Hip Hop Action Summit in the run-up to the 2008 election, what your priorities are. I know that you were very successful in registering a lot of young people to vote in the 2004 election, but not necessarily actually getting them to the polls. So
I think that was what Fox News said. It's not true. Young people went to the polls.
Oh, no, I
just want to say that because I think that the whole idea that they didn't, and sometimes even the idea that they lost, there was this defeatist attitude. The last election, before this one, I mean, 2 that we lost in a row. I say we, but I didn't. We registered people to do whatever they want. It just turned out that most of the people we registered did vote against George Bush. They did.
I'm not opposed
But we
to that.
registered. I don't know. I hope that we can.
But I'm just saying, I know that voter registration was a big thrust of your organization that you put together, and I'm wondering, I work in racial justice, so I'm wondering what your goals are in 2008. Is it going to be just limited to voter registration, or is it going to be going off to other topics?
We're still very involved in the criminal justice system regarding those drug laws. We still have we hope the Governor Spitzer, for one, as an example to the rest of the other 30 countries, states, will live up to his promise to do what we're doing a good job with the drug laws in California, for instance, and we hope that New York State will change their drug laws, and we hope that we'll work on that. We've been working on that for quite some time, and we do work on public education issues and funding for education. We work on financial literacy, which we've had 60 summits around the country where the rappers would show up at each case, and then we talk about something that's not taught in school. Most kids don't know what a FICO score is, so we do that. And then we want to register a lot of voters again. We hope that we can be successful in that effort as well. That's what we do.
Okay, another question here.
A question for Alan Alda. I'd like to know if you would come in Romania to promote your book and the magazine Scientific American.
I'm a little hard of hearing. What?
Who is your question to?
If Alan Alda could come in Romania to promote his book.
Like I'm going to Romania to
Yes.
promote my book?
Yes?
I'm going to, no, I have no plans yet to. The first book was published in Polish, however, so maybe if you have any Polish-speaking people in Romania, we could get some of those books over there, but I don't plan to go to Romania. However, we'll put that on our list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a question for Valerie. It really seems like your lawsuit against Karl Rove and against Dick Cheney and the administration and also the CIA is really a lawsuit on behalf of every single person in this room and in this country, and that you have been the voice that has been able to escape from this purgatory. How can we support you and Joe?
Thank you. The most important thing is to be engaged, be politically active, whether that's being on your school board, whether that's stuffing envelopes for a candidate, whether that's just being educated and understanding, because we are living in very troubled times, and it is imperative that we are all understand what our rights are and understand when they're being trampled on. As far as our lawsuit, thank you for asking, Joe and I are a couple ex-government workers. We don't have any trust funds, and I'm finding out lawyers cost a lot of money. So we have set up a trust. It's www.wilsonsupport.org, and that is to pay for all the expenses associated with our litigation. So thank you for asking.
Would you say the name of that again?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for asking. It's wilsonsupport.org. In our civil suit, we are supported by a group named CREW, stands for Citizens for Responsibility, Ethics in Washington. They are a nonpartisan 501c3 group. They kindly took on our case. They are committed to government accountability and openness. And so obviously we have a lot of mutually compatible interests. And if we are able to move beyond where we are now to get into discovery, that phase and so forth, then we will be helped by a firm in the San Francisco Bay Area, Joe Cutchett. But all of this costs money. I mean, the revolution that is taking place takes place in courtrooms, and we are a country of laws, and that's where we need to fight our fights. Thank you.
This question is for Russell Simmons. I read your book. I picked it up at your book signing in Atlanta, and you were talking about being persistent. So I followed you all the way to New York. And I just wanted to know if you got a chance to read it. It's the Nostradamus document, an insider street secrets of drugs, violence, and conspiracy in America's New South. But this, the Nostradamus document, that's the subtitle is all that long stuff. But I wanted to know if you got a chance to check it out, and if you didn't, I got another copy for you.
I think I need another copy. Guess I'm gonna have to read it.
This is a question for Paul Krugman. In one of your early articles, you explained that you got into political writing because of the lack of critical reporting going on in the country. Would you explain what you think, what happened to critical reporting, and is it coming back?
Choosing my words carefully here. There's a rawness about the story of what happened to reporting that I think is still not acknowledged. Very largely, it was intimidation, pure and simple. It was very, very unpleasant to say anything critical about this administration. It was particularly unpleasant to suggest that the motives might not be pure. There was a very dark period. It was pretty scary, not in a personal sense. I mean, I used to joke, about being sent to Gitmo, and whenever there was static on the line, about saying hello, Admiral Poindexter, which may yet turn out to have been true, but more that it was very clear it was bad for your career, or it seemed that it would be bad for your career to show any hint of criticism. There's an organized attack machine out there. It's not just, I mean, Valerie, of course, has seen it in a far greater way than anything I can imagine. But it's out there. There are people who will find, it's a machine that extends well beyond the government proper and even the Republican Party proper. It's a whole thing that will do its best. You better have a quiet private life if you want to get involved in any of these things. And it's not over. I mean, it's less extreme. Obviously, there's a lot of clipped wings out there. But I'll say, and this is one of those things that can come across as too self-serving, and so I'm always reluctant to say it. But if you look at this, look back now and ask yourself, if you were a journalist and you were thinking in 2002, 2003, when it was obvious, really, it was really quite obvious that we were going off on the wrong track. But what are the rewards and risks and rewards of saying what was actually happening? You might well have thought to yourself, gee, I better be quiet. And you know something, even now, you would have been right. The fact of the matter is that people who caved in, who allowed themselves to be intimidated, have not been punished for that. While those who were right, those who had the courage, for the most part, have had their careers at least set back. And I'm okay, thank God. But a lot of people have never been forgiven for having had the courage to be right, and this is one of those things that's really very upsetting. And I have no guarantee that it won't happen again. In fact, you can already see some signs in the campaign coverage of a double standard, where flaws of people are simply not reported on. Things they did are simply not reported on because the press is afraid.
Hi, this question is for Mrs. Wilson. Since your intelligent career has been derailed, what are your future career plans?
Yes, I resigned from the agency in January of 2006. As I mentioned, my husband and our children, we knew we needed to get out of Washington. We just moved a couple months ago. We're settling into Santa Fe. We are still living through this. My mother asked me that question, and I really don't have a good answer. Right now, it is finishing up the book, taking care of that, taking care of the lawsuits, taking care of a couple of 7-year-olds. And when the dust settles, I'll take a deep breath and go, okay, now what? Because I had always thought I had looked forward to a long career serving in our intelligence services. If none of this had happened, I would probably be overseas right now with my family, serving, doing a job I really love. But that door is closed, and so on to something else. I just don't know what it is yet. I'll have to read Russell's book too. Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for one last question.
Good afternoon. My name is Celeste Johnson, and I am a professional speaker, author, and host of a nationally syndicated radio show called Focus on Women. The reason why I say that is that all of you know the power of media, entertainment and media, and influence on people's thinking and ultimate behavior. So my question is to any of you, I know Russell Simmons is in hip hop, and I've had television or radio shows about hip hop media in general, some of the songs. Tell me, how do we strike a balance between freedom of speech and social responsibility that line that people cross and the influence that it has in our community. Can you address that, any and all of you?
I guess he's talking about the same.
That's you,
You know, I was aware of that cleavage, that little divide that you just described when I was part of a large group of people trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed about 20 or 25 years ago. I thought that, I didn't say it for that reaction, but I really thought an interesting question came up in those days. Whenever I would be booked on a show to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment, or if I just brought it up, which I used to do, if I was there to talk about some movie I was in, I would talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. It was felt by producers that in order to be fair, they would have to have somebody speak against it, regardless of whether or not what they said was true. And that doesn't sound like journalism to me. That sounds like some kind of an appearance of fairness. But I would think that fairness has more to do with trying to find out what's a legitimate position to take, a legitimate argument, and what's a lot of baloney. But it really is you raise a really interesting and important question, because whether or not what you're saying is true, apparently you have the right to say it under the First Amendment. But if you're telling everybody that you're engaged in an effort to report on the situation the way it is, and then you report things you know aren't true, or you allow things that aren't true to be said, where does that put your responsibility as a journalist, as a reporter? Not that you, and I don't want, on the other hand, journalists to take political positions. I want them to try to tell me what the facts are so I can make up my own mind about political positions. That's just my observation from those days. I'm sure everybody else here has a different opinion.
I developed a slow, or a one-liner about this very early on, which was that if the Bush administration said that the world was flat, the headlines in the major newspapers would read "Views differ on shape of Earth." That it was a I don't have a, it's very, and let me say there's another bias. I'm not sure this is where the questioner wanted to go, but what happens in political reporting, I think partly because of this fear of being controversial, is that you end up reporting on the campaign but not on the issues. I went through this. You go through. I believe it's happening again, but a healthcare policy, which was something that I was and am very interested in. In the 2004 campaign, I went through months and months of network news reports. And there were a number of reports on how the candidates' healthcare plans were playing in the media. Playing with audiences. But zero reports on what was actually in those healthcare plans. So, and you can see this right now. This is one of the previous question to me about, I'm terribly worried that we're going to have another campaign in which we're going to learn about the candidates' clothing and their speaking styles and their haircuts, and nothing at all about the issues. And it's partly because the news media are afraid that they'll be accused of taking sides if they report the facts.
Well, I knew it was going to come to this because it's been a subject that I've been... we live in a very sexist society. And we find that, every time we turn on a show like Cops, there's a guy beating his wife. And we have this history, which was probably even worse. I would certainly say it was worse in the past, and it keeps getting, a little bit better, just a little bit better. Men are very sexist. And that's our fact, and that's our reality. It's a sad truth that where women are objectified so often in everything that almost every commercial, every time we get a chance, that's what we do. That reality is our truth. I don't really know the answers at what level you should show, what cool dress, short dress. I know the dresses are longer now this week, in fashion. And I know that, the rappers, who are, sometimes, lots of times rappers in the past have been, and not only rappers, but in the history of art forever, they always, you know, are pissed at the paintings that are painted by the artists of depict society in one way or another. Can't believe it, they put this shit on paper, that they said it. It's a sad truth that we have to deal with, and language becomes an issue later, and I'll talk about that just briefly. I'm going to make this whole thing as quickly, but I want to get out a point. I don't believe, because Ludacris is one great example of how it enrages a lot of people about sexism. I can't imagine that he's nearly as sexist as his father. If his father was a preacher, if his father was a fireman or a policeman, he was much more, I mean, because Ludacris is managed by women, controlled by, you know, his whole, you know, not being told to do by a woman because he's married, but because they were his managers and his bosses, and got a certain relationship with women that I think is different from the previous generations, you know. So, I mean, I think the rap generation is less sexist, less homophobic. You know, they depict, they kind of exude the violence we exude everywhere else in the world, but whatever that is. But I don't always want to blame the artists, and I can't shut them up. Now, some of what they say could turn into fine art because people can't digest it now. Or it could be, I suggested recently, I got a lot of trouble. I mean, the activists don't like me, the rappers are a little bit mad this week. I said maybe we shouldn't use these 3 words on the radio, on mainstream radio. Because, I mean, not because the words haven't changed their meaning to a lot of us, but just because there's some people, and since all the rappers, 98%, 99% of the ones who are on the radio are black, and the black executives could make a statement as executives to black women acknowledging their pain. So maybe we won't say bitches and hoes on the radio. Maybe we'll make sure that we don't deliver radio bitch, hoe, or nigger. So that's, you know, it's the best thing I could do to bridge, I guess, the anger, and what I felt in my heart was a good statement from hip-hop to the people who are in pain. But I just think the language issue is a big issue, and, you know, people attach meaning to words, and they have different meanings depending on what generation and what they think. So yes, men are sexist. Yes, some of what's in rap records exudes that same sexism that's everywhere. And yes, it's offensive if we are used, it's more offensive if we're used to sweeping it under the rug all the time, ignoring it. When they said fuck the police, I was in a huge debate. I had to go to the Senate hearings, and I was, you know, but, you know, when I said eventually, I mean, not eventually, right away, I said, well, fuck them. And it created a whole debate, a whole dialogue between police and community, and I think that's critical. I mean, in these communities where people feel that the communities where people are suffering, they think the police are there as an occupying force. And the disconnect between community and police. I mean, I'm involved in programs, you know, where police and community have dialogue. I think that's what you do when you hear a song like Fuck the Police. You don't have to play it on the radio. It didn't play on the radio a lot. So artists have to say what they have to say. A lot of times you're not going to like what they say. Sometimes the idea is to look inside and see how it affects you and see what it makes you want to do. The conditions that create lyrics that we ignore, the disconnect or the contradictions in our society that are obvious if you're paying attention, come out in these rap records a lot, and they make us think, I hope. That's all I can say. I don't know if I have an answer that makes you happy. I'm sure you're still angry at the rappers, but a lot of people are.
Valerie, we have about 2 minutes.
Sure. I will just first begin my answer from a personal perspective. And for 4 years, my husband and I were subjected to character assassination, questions about our character, our integrity, you know, the whole smear. And anyone else can say, well, it's just politics. But when it's your spouse or you, and you know what you're reading are lies, it's very painful. And I have to say, I am much more cynical now. As a result of living through this experience, I read things with a different eye, I can tell you that. I think one of the outcomes of the Libby trial was that the American people saw for the first time the rather symbiotic relationship between, in particular, the Washington Press Corps and those in power, the administration. And that's why it is so important. Paul referred to the intimidation factor, but it's so important that as citizens we go out and educate yourself, and not just from one source. Someone just told me recently, you know, this unbelievable percentage of the American public that receives their news exclusively through talk radio. Well, that's really scary. And you know, all of you in here in the publishing business are doing your best, but I think that it's incumbent on us as citizens to go out and educate yourself and understand what the issues are and act accordingly.
Thank you. We need to bring it to a close. 2 o'clock is our cutoff point, but it's been fascinating. On behalf of everyone here, I want to thank the authors for their wonderful talk today. And on behalf of the authors, thank you all for joining us.